The party had been her idea, a gathering at the community centre to celebrate the holidays with friends, neighbours and colleagues. She insisted we attend, even though I wasn't exactly in the mood for mingling. The crowds weren't my thing, and neither was small talk with people I barely knew. But she looked so eager, so radiant in her red dress, her excitement infectious, that I gave in without much protest. The evening began harmlessly enough. I spent most of it nursing a drink and chatting with a few co-workers while she fluttered from group to group, effortlessly charming everyone. I kept an eye on her, I always did. She had that kind of magnetism that drew people in, and while I trusted her, I wasn't blind to the attention she got. It wasn't until later in the evening, well past the point where I was contemplating calling it a night, that I noticed her absence. One moment she was standing by the dessert table, laughing with some of her friends. The next, she was gone. I scanned the room, my eyes searching for her unmistakable figure, but the crowd seemed thicker now, the lighting dimmer, as the music changed to something slower, more intimate. That's when I saw them at the far end of the room, near the edge of the makeshift dance floor. She was swaying with someone I didn't recognize, a tall, smug-looking guy with slick-back hair and a smirk that set my teeth on edge. His hands rested on her waist, but as the seconds passed, I noticed them creeping lower, sliding with a boldness that made my stomach twist. I froze for a moment, trying to process what I was seeing. Was this some kind of joke? Had she had too much to drink? The way she smiled up at him, the way her body leaned into his, told me otherwise. My feet carried me forward before my brain could catch up. I crossed the room in what felt like slow motion, the heat rising in my chest with every step. When I reached them, I didn't shout, I didn't make a scene. I just spoke loud enough to cut through the music and their cozy little moment. What the heck is going on here? She turned her head slowly, almost lazily, as if I'd interrupted her in the middle of something important. Her eyes met mine without a hint of guilt or shame, her expression soft but infuriatingly calm. I promised him this dance, she said, her tone light, almost playful. You don't mind if I finish it with him, do you? The guy grinned at me then, a sharp, taunting grin that only fanned the flames inside me. He didn't say a word, just slid his left hand lower under her waist, making sure I saw it. Something in me snapped. Before I realized what I was doing, my hand shot out and grabbed him by the collar, yanking him back so fast that she stumbled a little, her shocked gasp barely registering over the pounding in my ears. His smirk vanished, replaced by wide-eyed surprise, as I shoved him away with a force that sent him sprawling to the floor. The room went silent. The music still played, but it felt distant, like background noise in a bad dream. All eyes turned toward us, the murmurs of the crowd starting up as people tried to piece together what had just happened. The guy scrambled to his feet, brushing himself off, as if to regain some shred of dignity, but the redness creeping up his neck betrayed him. He glared at me, his mouth opening to say something, but I didn't give him the chance. You've got about 2 seconds to walk out of here, I growled, my voice low and sharp, the kind that leaves no room for argument. Unless you want me to put you back on the ground. Harder this time. He hesitated, glancing at her like he expected some kind of backup. To my disbelief, she reached out as if to steady him, her hand lightly touching his arm. Stop it, she hissed at me, her voice dripping with irritation. You're making a scene. I'm making a scene, I repeated, my voice rising despite myself. You're the one slow dancing with some guy who can't keep his hands to himself, and I'm making a scene. Her eyes narrowed, her calm demeanor cracking just enough to reveal the defiance beneath. You're overreacting, she said, her voice clipped. It was just a dance. Just a dance, I took a step closer, lowering my voice again, but making sure every word hit its mark. You call what he was doing just a dance. The guy finally decided he'd had enough, muttering something under his breath and retreating toward the door with as much dignity as he could muster. A few people parted to let him through, their eyes darting between us as if expecting the drama to escalate. Her gaze followed him for a moment before snapping back to me, her lips pressed into a tight line. You didn't have to do that, she said, her tone accusatory, like I was the one in the wrong. My hands clenched into fists at my sides, the urge to yell battling with the need to keep what little composure I had left. I didn't have to. Are you serious right now? Do you even hear yourself? She crossed her arms, her chin lifting slightly in that way that told me she wasn't going to back down. It wasn't what it looked like. I stared at her, disbelief coursing through me. Do you think I'm an idiot? Because that's what it looks like from where I'm standing. Her silence was deafening. She held my gaze for a moment, her expression unreadable, before letting out a sharp sigh and turning away from me, like I was the one exhausting her. You're blowing this out of proportion, she muttered, shaking her head as if the whole situation was some minor inconvenience. Blowing this out of proportion, my voice cracked under the weight of my anger, drawing a few more curious stares from the onlookers. I stepped closer, lowering my voice again, but keeping it firm. You stood there letting him touch you like that. You smiled at him. And then you have the nerve to act like I'm the problem here. Her shoulders stiffened, and she turned back to me, her face a mask of cold defiance. If you'd just trusted me, you wouldn't have embarrassed yourself like this. I let out a short, humorless laugh, the sound surprising even me. Trusted you. You want to talk about trust while you're letting some guy's hands wander all over you in front of half the neighborhood. She flinched at that, her eyes darting around, as if suddenly aware of the audience we'd attracted. Keep your voice down, she hissed, her cheeks flushing not with shame, but with annoyance. Oh, now you care about keeping things quiet, I shot back, unable to keep the bitterness out of my tone. Where was that concern 5 minutes ago when you were? Enough, her voice cut through mine, sharp and commanding, but there was a tremor beneath it. We are not doing this here. For a moment, I just stood there, staring at her, the weight of her words sinking in. She wasn't apologizing. She wasn't even trying to explain. She was shutting me down like I was some unruly child throwing a tantrum. The crowd began to disperse, their curiosity fading as the tension between us simmered into a quieter, more private confrontation. The music continued, couples swaying on the dance floor as if nothing had happened, but the festive mood was gone for me. We'll talk about this later, she said finally, her voice cool and dismissive. She turned to walk away, as if she could just end the conversation on her terms. I reached out, grabbing her wrist not hard, just enough to stop her. No, we'll talk about this now, I said, my voice low but firm. What the hell is going on? And don't you dare tell me it was nothing. She pulled her hand free, her expression hardening. For a moment I thought she might say something, but then she simply turned and walked toward the bar, leaving me standing there in the middle of the room seething, confused and painfully aware that something had shifted between us, and not for the better. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, the blood roaring in my ears. She didn't even look back as she sauntered off, her head held high, her red dress swaying as if mocking me with every step. The bar swallowed her up, a cluster of people chatting and laughing, oblivious to the turmoil bubbling inside me. I clenched my fists so tightly that my knuckles cracked. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. But before I could move, a hand clapped down on my shoulder. I turned sharply, expecting some well-meaning idiot trying to calm me down. But it was worse. It was him. The smug bastard was back. Hey man, he said, his tone mockingly apologetic, his lips curling into that same smirk that had sparked this whole mess. I didn't mean to cause any trouble. She was just having a good time. You know how it is, right? I stared at him, the nerve of this guy hitting me like a punch to the gut. He wasn't even pretending to be sorry. If anything, he was enjoying this, like it was some kind of game. I warned you, I said quietly, my voice shaking with barely restrained fury. His grin widened. Come on, don't be like that. I mean, if she didn't want to dance, she would have said something, right? Maybe you should be asking her why she didn't. The words hit me harder than a physical blow. I felt my control slipping, the edges of my vision blurring as the rage surged. You've got 2 seconds to leave before this gets ugly, I growled, my body tensing. He laughed a short, derisive sound that made my skin crawl. Ugly. Man, I think it already is, and then, just to twist the knife, he added, you should have seen how she looked at me. You think she does that for you anymore? That was it. I snapped. I didn't think. I didn't hesitate. My fist shot out and connected with his jaw, the impact sending a sharp jolt up my arm. He staggered back, clutching his face, but before he could recover, I grabbed him by the shirt and drove him backward, slamming him into the nearest table. Glasses shattered. People screamed. The room erupted into chaos. You want to run your mouth now, I snarled, pinning him down as he struggled beneath me. His hand shot up, catching me across the cheek with a wild swing. The pain barely registered. All I could see was red. I drew back to hit him again, but suddenly I was being yanked off him, strong hands grabbing my arms and pulling me back. I twisted, fighting against whoever had stepped in, but there were too many of them, 2 men, maybe 3, dragging me away. Their voices shouted over the noise. "Calm down," one of them barked. "Let me go," I roared, trying to wrench free. My eyes darted to my wife, who was still by the bar, her drink in hand, watching the scene unfold with a look that wasn't shock or concern, it was annoyance. She didn't move, didn't rush to stop me, didn't say a word. The guy I'd hit got to his feet, wiping blood from his lip with the back of his hand. His smirk was gone, replaced by a cold, calculating glare. He adjusted his collar, then glanced at her. "You really married this guy," he sneered, loud enough for everyone to hear. "No wonder you were looking for something better." The room fell silent, his words hanging in the air like a bomb waiting to go off. I lunged at him again, but the men holding me tightened their grip, dragging me toward the exit. "Get him out of here before he does something stupid," one of them muttered, their tone more annoyed than concerned. I struggled, my voice raw, as I shouted, "Don't you dare walk away from this." But it was no use. They forced me through the doors and into the cold night air, the crowd's whispers and laughter fading behind me. The door slammed shut, and I was alone. For a moment I just stood there, the icy wind biting at my skin, my breath coming in ragged gasps. My hands were trembling, whether from the cold or the adrenaline, I couldn't tell. Then the door opened again, and she stepped out. But instead of rushing to my side, instead of apologizing or explaining or doing anything to make this right, she crossed her arms and glared at me. "What the hell is wrong with you?" she demanded, her voice sharp, like I was the one who'd ruined everything. I stared at her, my mind reeling. "What's wrong with me? Are you serious right now?" "You embarrass me," she snapped, stepping closer. "Do you have any idea how ridiculous you looked, starting a fight in the middle of the party? People are going to be talking about this for weeks." "You embarrass me," I shot back, my voice cracking under the weight of my anger. "You let that guy put his hands all over you. You let him disrespect me in front of everyone, and you're worried about how it makes you look." She rolled her eyes, the gesture so dismissive it might as well have been a slap. "Oh, please. It was a dance, not an affair. You're being paranoid." Paranoid, I stepped closer, the distance between us shrinking until I could feel the heat of my anger bouncing off her. "Is that what you call this? Is that what he was talking about in there when he said you were looking for something better?" Her face twisted into a scowl, but she didn't deny it. My stomach dropped. "You've got nothing to say to that, do you?" She opened her mouth like she was going to argue, then closed it again, her silence louder than any confession. In that moment, something inside me broke. I stood there, staring at her, every muscle in my body so tightly coiled I thought I might snap. Her silence wasn't an admission. It was worse. It was indifference. She didn't care enough to explain, didn't feel the need to deny or justify anything. The betrayal wasn't just about her letting him touch her, letting him speak to me like I was nothing. No, the real betrayal was her apathy. All the years we'd built together, the sacrifices, the love, it all meant nothing to her. "You're really not going to say anything, are you?" I said, my voice low and venomous. Not even an apology. As her lips parted, but instead of the words I desperately needed to hear, she muttered, "You're overreacting. You always do." That was the last straw. "Fine," I said, my voice eerily calm, even to my own ears. "You think I'm overreacting? Watch how I react now." I turned on my heel and walked away, the cold night air biting into me as I made my way to the car. She didn't follow, didn't even call out after me. I didn't need to look back to know she was standing there, arms crossed, waiting for me to come crawling back like I always had. But not this time. The ride home was a blur, my mind racing with 1,000 thoughts. Memories of us together, the good times, the moments when I thought we were unshakable played in my head like a cruel slideshow. And then his face, her indifference, their laughter. It all burned like acid, fueling the fire inside me. By the time I pulled into the driveway, I'd made up my mind. If she wanted to treat me like I was nothing, then I'd show her just how far I could go when I didn't care anymore. The plan started small. Revenge wasn't about rage, it was about control. She thought she could walk all over me, humiliate me, and move on without consequence. She was about to learn otherwise. The next morning, I called in sick to work and spent the day setting things in motion. First, I accessed our shared bank account and withdrew half the money legally mine. Then I transferred all the household utilities and streaming subscriptions into her name. Petty? Sure. But it was just the beginning. Next came the digital trail. I dug into her phone records, her email, her social media accounts. She wasn't particularly careful, and it didn't take long to piece together a pattern, a trail of breadcrumbs that confirmed my suspicions. Late night texts to numbers I didn't recognize, receipts for fancy dinners I hadn't attended, even a few hotel charges during her supposed business trips. It wasn't just him. There were others. My chest burned with a mix of fury and disgust, but I kept my composure. If she wanted to play games, I'd show how it was done. I gathered everything, screenshots, receipts, timestamps. I wasn't just going to confront her. I was going to dismantle the life she'd so carelessly built on lies. The strike came that weekend. We were scheduled to host a small dinner party, just a few close friends, something she'd planned weeks ago. She was always meticulous about these things, making sure the house was spotless, the food perfect, her image untouchable. I decided it would be the perfect stage. The night arrived, and I played along, smiling and chatting as if nothing was wrong. She wore that same red dress, the one from the party, and it made my stomach churn, but I didn't let it show. The guests were seated, glasses clinking as they toasted to nothing in particular. She basked in the attention, laughing, her charm in full force. It was sickening how easily she wore the mask. When dessert was served, I stood up, holding my glass. Before we dig in, I said, forcing a smile, I just want to ... say a few words. She looked up at me, surprised but pleased. She always loved being the center of attention. I want to thank you all for coming tonight, I began, my tone warm, steady. It's been a tough few days, but having you here means a lot. Her brow furrowed slightly, sensing something off, but she said nothing. And I especially want to thank my wife, I continued, turning to her with a smile that didn't reach my eyes, for reminding me how important honesty is in a marriage. The room went silent. Her smile faltered, her confident demeanor cracking. Because you see, I said, my voice hardening, it's easy to take things for granted, to think the person you're with will always be there, no matter what. I pulled out my phone, tapping the screen. But sometimes I added, looking directly at her, they surprise you. The TV on the wall came to life, the screen lighting up with a slideshow of damning evidence messages, photos, receipts, all of it. Gasps filled the room as the reality of what they were seeing sank in. Her face drained of color, her eyes wide with shock. What the hell are you doing? She hissed, her voice low but trembling with panic. Just showing everyone the truth, I said coldly, my tone sharp enough to cut through the chaos, since you clearly have no interest in doing it yourself. The room erupted into chaos. Her friends whispered among themselves, some staring at her in disbelief, others looking away, embarrassed. She shot up from her chair, reaching for the remote, but I stepped in her way. Don't bother, I said flatly. The damage is done. Her composure finally cracked. Her eyes blazed as she rounded on me. You bastard, she spat, her voice venomous. No, I replied, my voice calm, resolute. That would be you. Without another word, I grabbed my coat and walked out, leaving her standing there alone to face the wreckage she'd created. The fallout. The divorce papers were filed the very next morning. By the end of the week, I'd moved into a small apartment downtown, taking only what was mine. I didn't need much, just peace. As for her, the truth spread like wildfire. The texts, the pictures, the whispers, it all came back to her in waves. The perfect image she'd spent years cultivating was shattered. Her friends turned cold. Her reputation lay in ruins. And me? For the first time in years, I felt free. If you enjoyed the story, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more gripping tales like this one.